Most people think of Bitcoin as a simple asset. You buy it, you hold it, maybe you send it, but behind the scenes, Bitcoin is constantly evolving. And right now, some of the biggest debates in years are unfolding inside the software that keeps Bitcoin alive, Bitcoin Core. Now, the upcoming V30 release isn't just a routine update, it's sparking arguments over censorship resistance, network bloat, and even Bitcoin's true purpose. Now, for casual investors, it might sound technical. For seasoned users, it does feel like deja vu from the 2017 block size wars. But for both, the implications are real. Fees, security, innovation, even regulatory scrutiny. V30 touches all of it. So let's start at the beginning. What exactly is Bitcoin Core? When people hear Bitcoin, most think of the asset, the digital gold they can buy and hold. But behind the scenes, Bitcoin runs on software. The main version of that software is called Bitcoin Core. It's what thousands of nodes around the world run to keep the network alive, validating transactions and enforcing the rules of consensus. In simple terms, Bitcoin Core is the reference client, the blueprint of how Bitcoin is supposed to work. Now, unlike a traditional company, there's no CEO or central office running Bitcoin. The development of Bitcoin Core is handled by a global, decentralized group of volunteers. Now, these developers collaborate openly on GitHub through mailing lists and even in old school IRC chat rooms. Some names you might hear often are Gloria Zhao or Hennedy Stepanov, but there are hundreds of contributors who've shaped the code over the years. It's messy, it's decentralized, and it's exactly what keeps Bitcoin free from capture. Now, of course, that doesn't mean there aren't disagreements. One of the longest running debates inside the community has been around network bloat, whether Bitcoin should allow certain types of data that aren't strictly financial. Developers like Luke Deschier, who maintains an alternative version of the software called Bitcoin Knots, have argued that Bitcoin Core is too permissive, letting so-called spam fill up the block space. Core developers, on the other hand, often emphasize flexibility and censorship resistance, believing Bitcoin should remain a neutral base layer, even if people use it in ways that not everyone likes. The software itself is constantly evolving. The most recent stable release, version 29.0, came out in April 2025. It patched denial of service vulnerabilities, improved peer-to-peer networking, and upgraded wallet functionality. A few months later, v29.1 rolled out as a stability update, and just recently, the first release candidate for v30 dropped on September 12th of 2025. That release candidate is where the sparks are really flying because it introduces some major changes, relaxing OP return limits so users can embed larger amounts of data, setting a legacy SIGOPS cap at 2,500, overhauling the CoinStats index, removing outdated Berkeley DB wallets, and improving performance to cut down on orphan blocks by around 15%. Some of these are necessary upgrades that keep Bitcoin flexible, efficient, and resilient. For others, there is a slippery slope toward bloat, centralization, and even regulatory scrutiny. And this philosophical divide cuts to the heart of Bitcoin itself. Is it just peer-to-peer cash, as Satoshi originally described, or is it a censorship-resistant, programmable base layer for all kinds of applications? Sounds like Ethereum to me. But if you're just holding Bitcoin on a hardware wallet or using an app like Electrum, you might wonder, why should I care about a new release of Bitcoin Core? Now, the truth is, for most average users, V30 won't change the way you buy, hold, or send Bitcoin. But that does not mean it's irrelevant. These updates affect the underlying network, and over time, they shape your experience through fees, transaction speed, and even how secure the system feels. For everyday holders, the changes in V30 are more about signals than direct disruption. They tell us how Bitcoin governance works in practice, through open source debate, competing software versions, and rough consensus. This resilience is part of why institutions trust Bitcoin, but debates like these can also spark volatility because investors worry about fragmentation or rising costs. So let's break it down in simple terms. If you're not running a node, the biggest difference you might notice is in transaction costs. By relaxing the limits on data that can be stored on-chain, V30 makes it easier for people to embed things like inscriptions, NFTs, or other non-monetary data. That could push up demand for block space and temporarily drive up fees. On the other hand, performance tweaks in the code like taproot optimization can make everyday transfers more efficient and sometimes cheaper. Now, if you're using a wallet, there's one important detail. Support for very old wallet formats based on Berkeley DB is being removed. Most modern wallets have already migrated, so for most users, nothing changes. But this is important. If you've been holding Bitcoin since the early days and still rely on legacy setups, you'll need to migrate to avoid compatibility issues. Now, for those running nodes, the picture is more nuanced. Node operators may see higher disk and bandwidth usage if data-heavy activity spikes. Some options, like manually setting data carrier size, are being depreciated, which reduces flexibility by those trying to filter out certain transactions. And while Core emphasizes configurability, there's no denying that bigger blocks of data mean higher resource requirements, which could discourage casual node operators over time. Longer term, the impacts could go either way. On the positive side, V30 makes Bitcoin more adaptable, potentially opening the door to innovations like zero-knowledge proofs or more complex DeFi-style applications on-chain. It could also increase miner fee revenue after halvings, keeping the network secure. On the negative side, it raises concerns about centralization, legal liabilities, and higher costs for basic transactions, which may push more users to rely on layer 2s like the Lightning Network. Now, for seasoned users, these changes are worth watching closely. Adoption metrics like how many nodes upgrade to V30 versus sticking with alternatives like knots offer a real-time read on community sentiment. As of now, knots already accounts for about a quarter of all nodes, and that share could grow if resistance to V30 hardens. For new investors, the message is simpler. Bitcoin is evolving. These debates aren't signs of weakness, they're signs of life. The fact that thousands of people are scrutinizing every line of code, every trade-off, is exactly why Bitcoin has survived for over 15 years. To really understand what's happening with V30, it helps to look back at Bitcoin's history, especially in 2017 when the network went through one of its most dramatic conflicts. That year, debates over block size limits and scalability split the community into camps. On one side, Bitcoin core developers wanted to implement segregated witness, or SegWit, to increase transaction throughput without changing the block size directly. On the other side, big blockers pushed for simply raising the block size limit to handle more transactions on-chain. The dispute culminated in the creation of Bitcoin Cash on August 1st of 2017. Now, for a while, the community was deeply divided. Some saw BCH, or Bitcoin Cash, as the true Bitcoin, closer to Satoshi's original vision of peer-to-peer cash. Others argued that preserving decentralization and keeping block sizes small was essential to Bitcoin's survival. It was a period of intense tribalism, with figures like Roger Ver loudly promoting Bitcoin Cash and warning that core developers were betraying Bitcoin's mission. And the parallels to today are striking. In 2017, the battle was over scalability and fees. In 2025, the fight is over data usage, whether Bitcoin should allow things like inscriptions, NFTs, or other non-financial information on-chain. In both cases, the argument boils down to philosophy. Is Bitcoin narrowly money, Or is it a censorship-resistant, programmable base layer for whatever people want to build on it? Let me know your thoughts on that down below in the comments. There are, however, important differences. The 2017 conflict led to an actual chain split. Bitcoin Cash forked off, creating a separate cryptocurrency that still exists today, though at only a fraction of Bitcoin's market cap. Now with V30, the disagreement is more about software policy than consensus rules. That means the risk of a hard fork is much lower. Now instead, we're seeing what some call a node war, where alternatives like Bitcoin Knots gain traction as a protest against Core's direction. Knots already runs on roughly 25% of nodes, showing that dissent has weight, but not enough to fracture the chain outright. Looking back at 2017 also highlights the emotional dynamics. At the time, investors worried about chain splits, double spends, and miner centralization. Institutions hesitated, fearing instability, the very few that were around in 2017. But once SegWit activated on August 24th and SegWit 2x was canceled a few months later, Bitcoin emerged stronger than ever. The price surged about 50% in the week after activation, climbing from around $1,835 to $2,748. And by year's end, Bitcoin hit all-time highs. Now, the lesson is that internal conflict doesn't have to be fatal. In fact, these debates often sharpen Bitcoin's resilience. The scaling debate pushed development toward Lightning and second-layer solutions, which now handle millions of cheap, instant payments. Bitcoin shifted from being seen mainly as electronic cash to now its dominant narrative as digital gold. That evolution may have diverged from Satoshi's original white paper, but it cemented Bitcoin's role as a durable global asset. So when we look at the V30 debates, we should see them not as an existential threat, but as a part of Bitcoin's natural growing pains. Just like in 2017, the community is arguing about trade-offs. And just like in 2017, Bitcoin will likely come out stronger, even if the road feels messy in the moment. Most of the headlines about V30 focus on the obvious: bigger data through op return, higher fees, or worries about network bloat. But there are deeper, less discussed angles that matter just as much for Bitcoin's future. And one of the biggest blind spots is miner-level censorship. In theory, miners are neutral. They package transactions into blocks without judging the content. But if embedding arbitrary data becomes easier, miners might start filtering to avoid legal or regulatory risk. Imagine a large US-based pool worried about OFAC compliance. If they detect inscriptions or other data that they consider risky, they might quietly drop those transactions. That flips Bitcoin's neutrality on its head and risks concentrating power in the hands of the biggest, most compliant mining operations. Closely tied to that is the issue of legal liability. If people can more easily store illicit content like copyrighted material or worse on Bitcoin, does that put node operators at risk? A cloud provider hosting a node might face pressure to shut it down if regulators claim it's storing harmful data. Even if most of this is just fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the chilling effect is real. Hobbyists could be deterred from running nodes, and decentralization could take a hit. Then there's the economic angle. Core developers argue that filters don't work, that if someone wants to bloat the chain, they'll find a way. By removing limits, the system at least stays neutral. But that reasoning assumes the benefits of new applications outweigh the costs of heavier blocks. In practice, it's a dual-path trade-off. The network might gain innovation through new use cases, but it also risks higher baseline fees and heavier hardware requirements that make running a node less accessible. Governance is another overlooked factor. The way V30 has been handled, changes merged, despite vocal objections, shows that Bitcoin doesn't have a formal consensus mechanism outside of running different software. And that lack of clear governance can be both a strength and a weakness. Because on one hand, it prevents capture by a single authority, but on the other, it means disagreements linger and upgrades can deepen rifts instead of resolving them. If core and knots continue to diverge, it could slow future development and fracture community trust. And finally, there are ripple effects that most users haven't considered. Institutions face new compliance headaches if arbitrary data clogs blocks. Layer 2s like Lightning could see both pressure and opportunity. High base layer fees make them more attractive, but also harder to onboard if congestion gets severe. Privacy tools like CoinJoin services may suffer too, as mempools fill with non-financial noise. For new users, this can feel abstract, but the message is simple. Every upgrade has trade-offs, and they ripple outward in unexpected ways. For seasoned users, it's a reminder to watch miner behavior, node adoption, and the subtle shifts in how the network is actually used. Now, if there's one thing Bitcoin has proven over the past 15 years, it's resilience. Every debate, every fork, every controversy has tested it, and each time, the network has come out stronger. The SegWit battles in 2017 were supposed to tear Bitcoin apart. Instead, they pushed innovation toward Lightning, helped Bitcoin scale off-chain, and set the stage for its rise as digital gold. The V30 debates fit into that same pattern. Yes, there are risks, network bloat, higher fees, even the possibility of creeping centralization, but there are also opportunities. By making the base layer more flexible, Bitcoin can serve as a foundation, not just for money, but for programmable, censorship-resistant applications. And history shows that Bitcoin adapts, messily, but effectively. Look at the numbers today. As of September 20th, 2025, Bitcoin's market cap sits at $2.3 trillion. More than 23,000 reachable nodes secure the network, with both IPv4 and IPv6 adoption growing. Bitcoin Knots, the stricter alternative to Core, has surged to about 25% of nodes, proving that dissent is alive, but the ecosystem isn't fracturing. Mining difficulty is at record highs. ETF inflows continue to exceed 2.3 billion weekly, signaling strong institutional demand. And even with short-term volatility, the conviction among long-term holders is at historic levels, with more coins locked away in cold storage than ever before. The community itself has matured too. Instead of pure tribalism, we're seeing more nuanced debates. Influential voices like Michael Saylor brush off LP return as a minor third-order issue, while thinkers like Stefan Molyneux frame it as a philosophical expansion of Bitcoin's utility. These conversations reflect a culture that's less fragile and more capable of holding disagreement without breaking. For new investors, that means volatility is opportunity. Short-term turbulence shouldn't scare you. It's the nature of an asset that's still evolving, still being defined. For seasoned users, it's a call to action. Run a node, engage in the debates, and help shape the network's direction. Because Bitcoin isn't static. It's a living system steered by those who participate. Ultimately, Bitcoin doesn't need saving. Its game theory remains immaculate. Incentives align miners, developers, and holders in ways that no government or corporation can replicate. The V30 debates are just the last chapter in a story we've seen before: conflict, adaptation, resilience, and growth. And if history is any guide, Bitcoin won't just survive. It will come out stronger on the other side. So if there's one takeaway, it's this: debates like V30 aren't a sign of weakness. They're proof of Bitcoin's strength. Conflict exposes trade-offs, sharpens the code, and ultimately makes the network more resilient. If you want to keep learning about Bitcoin and crypto with clear explanations, not hype, not fear, but facts, head over to learningcrypto.com. You'll find resources, insights, and tools to help you navigate this space with confidence and independence. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.